fear of death, what will happen,
Yeah.
myths around it, and so on, as around a mystery. We know the history of ourselves, but the mystery is in supposedly death is another dimension that
Yeah.
doesn't include the body, that doesn't include the self. Okay. Um, is there an isness? And I say, well, in the way we measure isness here, but sometimes you make contact. Sometimes you have conversation with the absent one, just as you would have with a lover who was 1,000 miles away while you're on a trip or something was happening. And the
Yeah.
conversation is normal. It's been normalized by phones, but it was normalized before phones by feelings, communicated.
Yeah.
People, uh, before the advent of these expressions, intuition was the phone, was the dynamic. There were certain intuitions that developed that people shared so deeply
Yeah.
that dying, living weren't being shifted to this place. Slaves who were separated because they sold their kids. In fact, they would even line the origins of dating was to find what kind of slave kid did you want? Did you want it to be tall, light skinned, this? And then you would find the characters to do that, but they had no ownership of the child. So that was heartbreaking to that extent. They were for sale. So the intent when you then brought couples together, you were then making for sale children, and the people had no commitment to each other in that way, but that couldn't be. So if they did have it, they had to hide it or exchange. There had to be a human exchange taking place, but the human feeling would get in the way of the salesmanship. You understand? So somehow holy gee, if you walk in with any sensitivity to any circumstance like that and you see the underpinnings of normalcy,
Yeah.
then you see that normalcy means being a human being in a very strange setups at times that you're navigating through.
Yeah.
But now, when you are, let's say you've had a life then of finding out yourself, growing up, finding out yourself centrally, sexually, structurally, who you are, assuming an identity, assuming a way of navigating. Um, there are measurements in the social structure. If you have a job, what you're doing, what your health is, all of that is a measure. And that's what families usually ask when people were thinking of getting married or getting together. They say, does he have a job? What does he do? What is that? So the family would be concerned. They say, why? Well, one thing, they like to be relieved of the burden of having to pay for someone again,
Right.
probably. If it has, let's assume a logic of the social structure. But at the same time, you would like the person to be able to provide. But then you also would know that your kid would probably not be looking for a person who would provide, but would be looking for a creative person who was happy and cool. You know?
Yeah.
Okay. The exact wrong person that the parent would want would be that the human before they know how to get a job.
Right.
So the very attraction that you would want the children to have, you would be fearful because you would want to ensure, and somehow we're just imagining you would want to ensure their future. Who's calling? Let's see. 505 Santa Fe 699. Maybe should I answer it, Kai? Okay, I didn't answer it.
You can answer it.
No, I didn't answer it in time.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah, well, I guess we have to include it in the middle of whatever we're doing. Right. But what we are doing and conversing about is, again, the perceptive sense that one has where something breaks your heart in some way, and you come back in the story where the naivete, the naive feeling isn't there. I say that there are moments that happen, especially if you've had a life of yogic practice or practices or teachers or whatever, that there are moments waiting. in the story. And they're usually accidental moments because they usually can't have the literal motive of the self. And what is the self? The self continuity, the survival sense of self, blocks out a peripheral vision. So that peripheral vision is called spiritual. Well, it's given all sorts of names because one can't be in that world in the same way that one is literally as a self in the world. But there may be moments that happen to you where that peripheral self becomes your reality. Now that happens as a creative life, like something happens and you want to explore it, or you read a children's book as a kid and that becomes your reality and so on. So somehow you touch on a dynamic that's there that allows you to imagine a world, a life, an expression really amazingly contrary to the literal life that you're in. So that's somehow the projection out of the circumstance you're in to a happy life, to a rich life, to a healthy life.
Yeah.
This ability to dream. And you see the dream then in the hope. You see the dream in the scheme. And then sometimes you make contact with a dream, but only if the life starts to become creative for you. If it's writing, creating, this or that, and you see the creative dimension that runs through your life, then the dreams awaken from a different place. You're included in the dream, where usually in the literal dreaming, you're excluded in. But included means that it is a process that it's almost as if I had certain experiences, almost as if the dream was that I was painting. And as I was pushing the color on it, mushing it, other colors were emerging from it. And, so it was kind of, I was in that creative process around that time, around the paintings. The dream then started to show me a dimension of the painting. That inherent, again, that's where I found that inherent in one color were 100 colors. But that there was a different way of looking at it. And different meant only that the logical thought of the person wasn't based on a continuity. And so that will say, why is my girlfriend like her a lot? She doesn't want this. She's not.
Yeah.
And well, why is that? As if it's a dynamic, but it's coming from the self that is measuring it. Not that
Right.
it's true. Because in the literal world of relationship, it becomes a possessive. In the creative world of relationship, it's not a possessive, it's a shared experience. So that's what the dopey hey baby thought was. When hey baby entered into it, it opened up another dimension of the situation that you were in that was hidden in plain sight that you could imagine. But when there was a real hey baby, a genuine feeling shared, a genuine feeling seemed to open up a parallel dimension, but it also seemed to open up a part of the brain that was dormant.
Yeah.
So you then find out that there are quiet, private conversations happening with the outer. The inner and the outer are in a dialogue. The dialogue is multidimensional.
Yeah.
So the person may experience it literally as hopes, plans, thought process, or whatever. But in the creative process, that's released, where it's not only literal, but hope is a medium. We can work, you can make a project using hope as a medium. And they say, well, once you explore hope, you see dimensions of hope that are remarkable. But it's part of you imagine it as many colors available to you on your palette and painting.
I see,
You start to see the sensitivities in you, that there's creative dynamics, and that the life itself is a creative process that literalizes. But something happens. So let's say it's a literal thing that you should then connect with a partner, and they want this and you want that, and it's normalized. But when you look at it, you see a creative process going down, and you see that each person is free in it. Even though there's, but as you visit it, you see that it's subject to forces. And so there is also a desire in the being, you see, for a genuineness that's not laid out, that allows you then to go into the literal world. So somehow, partner, you want there to be an exchange feeling. And you'd like it to be, so we are utilizing the mantra of, hey, baby, as a no doubt shared feeling. Hmm?
Yeah.
A no doubt shared feeling is really a no doubt shared feeling. I don't think it can be gotten to in any way. What you mean, a headlock? Grab someone in a
Yeah.
headlock and so it seems to me that the duality of the story is the duality of our existence. We are this person, literally, but we also a parallel life, a creative life alongside our literal life of survival. So there's a moment in your literal life that there may be someone waving or an accident happens and it opens up a doorway perceptively.
Yeah.
Or anything. It may even be that you make a song or you make a movie or you're this and you see flux that you make a stage
Yeah.
setting for something that's in flux and you show it from its early days to its late days in one room and you move through time and you show an experience. And then as you are thrown into that aspect of your life, that becomes a way of seeing. That you see at the same time you have access then to all the dimensions available to you. But there becomes second nature, which is, so it's a religious being without being organized by the religion. There's a different motive. The motive in the being a religious being is an essential freedom, a creative freedom. It doesn't mean the freedom yet of breaking out of a prison. It means that one is born free. From the perception, one is born. That's what I would imagine that born again means. And I feel that a kind of despair that happened to me in India. After it was being really achieved and I was having deep experience, but then I woke up and despair came in the form of being full of shit about something. But that then threw everything away. It threw, okay. And so, but then I then discovered that feeling where everything collapsed, what couldn't be forced, because logic says don't do it, didn't do it, you still have a nice scene. But the fact of it is that it was over perceptively. It may take a day or two or a year before the body follows and things follow. But when something breaks or is interrupted, then on different levels, it starts to collapse or shift. On a scientific level, you could see the molecular nature is shifting. But then in the structure, you'll see arguments or this or that or mishaps or whatever. But you see it part of it, that person may be calling again. Let's try it. Hello? Oh, hi. Oh, hi, Gershon. I'm on the line here with a few friends. How are you? Are you okay? You have a day or two left? Okay, so we're in a similar boat. Maybe for different reasons, but it's a similar situation. So please call again, okay? I'm online with on YouTube here. I'm really glad to hear you. I mentioned your name the other day. I said, "Who? You remember that mother?" You know. No, I experienced the first years of living a life close with you, you know, and your circumstance and what we shared then, you know. Remember, you did an interview for your there. Yeah, Michigan interview was called. I'm working with schmuck number 8 now. It's very our wife says to her husband, in the contest of schmucks, he would come in second. And the guy gets hurt feelings and said, why don't I come in first? And he says, you're too much of a schmuck to come in first. Okay. I'll see you later. Give a call. Okay, bye-bye. Now, that's funny. I haven't heard from that fellow for 20 some odd years.
Oh,
He
wow.
even had a newspaper in town. And,
I remember him.
yeah, I remember. And in the early days, it was very intense there, I think. Whoosh. So we'll see. As I say, it's not past, it's parallel. But mentally, it's past until you bump into something and you see it's coexisting. So you see then in what you would call rejection, in the literal sense, in retrospect, you see your life may have been saved by the so-called rejection because you were too schmucky to enter into the story for seeing how deep it was. So let's say if in fact you've come close to someone now at this stage in your life, they probably want something authentic from you. They probably won't accept joke-telling bullshit. What do you think? Will you accept now in a lover, unless they were a lover first and then they told the jokes, but not if they told jokes to get close to you. So let's say come to a place of authenticity in our own lives and a longing for a genuineness.
Yeah.
Hmm? And I feel that that genuineness looks at the story from a different place where it's not so needy
Mm.
that because of its neediness, it suppresses its creativity, its need to be in love, its feeling to be true, but it has to
Yeah.
suppress all that because it has to take a job that it hates, or it has to be, or the relationship is maintained so it's afraid of an honest conversation because it may dispel.
Right. Right.
But I say if the molecular nature shifts after a hey baby conversation, do we want to do this any longer? Are we still into it? What's your feelings? I don't, there's no layout and shape. They'll write books about how to's, but it still
Yeah.
has to be genuine.
Right.
And when it's genuine, it comes from a different place.
Hmm.
Then you're the writer of the book. In other words, when it comes from a genuine place, it comes that way sometimes when it's found out, and the feeling breaks.
Yeah.
When in fact the genuine hey baby conversation is inherently part of your life, it's not always literal. But the creative conversation is, and the creative love affair is a creative love affair. It's not owned literally by something. It assumes the shape that's agreed upon. So then it's but it happens naturally. A couple agree to have a child because they have feelings for each other. So they're pretty close to that as a philosophy. One
Mhm.
visits philosophical elements in their life where a feeling somehow gives you entree into another reality. You can, if you have a feeling for one, you may meet their parents and talk as if you're somebody. So immediately, you can assume an identity that you wouldn't think of assuming.
Yeah.
So it's all inherent. There is a dialogue going on already with living and dying as a phenomenon. Now, dying may come across as losing a job. Dying may come across as breaking up. Living may come across as finding someone or sharing something. So you see inherently in the form are elements of living and dying as a process. So that's why when you lose a lover, it has very close to a death experience, because death is not only the stopping of the body, it's the inherent energies that are running through the body. The body is not some abstract element when you are on the journey. The body then becomes an enemy at times, a foe at times, a friend, deep friend, a lover at times.
Mm.
But perceptively, when you see, as we were discussing recently about, you then really see your immune system in action.
Yeah.
And you see the remarkableness of the everyday living that has been, and the juggling act in the body and in the being. And you see living and dying inherently in all forms. And it doesn't, but it won't lend itself to a neurotic element about it. To be exposed to living and dying as a naturalness in life is to have transformed something. Some dormant aspect of oneself is illuminated. And when it's illuminated and you see living and dying inherently in the life, you see the life becomes an art. Your life is not your life as a possessive any longer in the same way. There's a difference between fearing for, managing, and caring for. Caring for is to be able to see something deeply. And when you see it deeply, it's a shared experience. That caring even happens in absence.
Yeah.
Maybe profoundly in absence because it's not literalized so much as care, but shared experience. So then in that, there are moments where the mechanics of living dominate again, where there are moments when there's a hey baby moment, and that hey baby is, are you still into it? So we'll say friends here in the businesses they've created, the businesses are more creations than there are literal business. So they don't have the fierceness of business of trying to succeed or get ahead or determine, but they have more of the cooperation in the life that you're living. How would I apply it? I would say it's like here in the neighborhood, the different folks grow their own gardens. So it's not, everybody has their own style of garden and what they need and what they want. It's not a competitive, or it's not out in the world that sometimes the people exchange as a friendly. I think the origins of business was a friendly. And as long as it was within a community or something, everyone knew everyone's circumstance, so there wasn't. Okay. But as it becomes literally a job, an abstraction, a continuity, you become increasingly a number in the structure.
Yeah.
And there's always some hidden forces called the bosses or the ones in control that are unknown, that we theorize, that we have conspiracies about. But the problem isn't the conspiracies. As we meet them, they become regular schmoes like everyone else.
Right.
That there's a thread that runs through humanity, and there may be even a thread of loneliness that runs through humanity that's in every level of it. So we meet in our exploration what the creativity saw. What you saw in the movie was you saw the whole person's life laid out in an hour and a half or 2 hours. And a continuum and this and that, and you can even imagine. So the movie started to resemble, once you saw the movies, you started to see things in your own life, in the similarity in the film. There was a mirror effect to some degree. And I say there are moments when you see your life from that perspective where it was a movie and is a movie, meaning that it's a creative act. Now that it doesn't have its literal element, but when you see the creative dimensions of the life, then you see it's not limited to birth and death. You see the identity is limited to birth and death, and actually is that guy when it arrived. But from the creative perspective, what was happening, what looked like before the person took the body. The lovers, what they went through, that was as much the person from the creative perspective, what the lovers were going through and what the experience was and what the basis of the lovemaking was for the baby. Also from the creative perspective enters into the story. So they've tried to have rules. They've tried to have rules that the church tries to organize what that should be, and they try to approximate what a spiritual experience would be by leaving a ritual on it. But you see, the spiritual experience was the genuineness of the love affair. Because then there was a real feeling to have the child out of a love feeling.
Yeah.
So somehow, even if the form changed, there was a feeling to have a love baby.
Yeah.
As knowing that somehow the love was a protective. Now, it didn't mean protect from what you couldn't literalize.
Yeah.
Okay.
A purity or something. of purity or energy.
Just like hormones run in the story, just like cells run in the story, just like you inherit a nose, in a circumstance, you also seem to inherit social circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
And styles and situations like that that seem to come in as natural. So what to another person seems like a screw up is natural to you, where you're laid back or you're this or that. Okay.
Right.
So you understand that there's organized behavior when you get in. And so when you get into organized behavior, you try to pretend that you're organized in that way.
Huh.
So when you pretend you're organized in that way with a literal job, they could see that you're pretending.
Right.
Even though you may have the
Bad
smart,
actor.
even though you have the smarts to get along in the company, they know that you want to get out of there quickly, or you're trying to meet a girlfriend in the job or something like that.
Right.
So let's say it's more interrupting the literalness. It was like, how did you interrupt slavery? How could you live in slavery? And you see that the person had to interrupt it. They had to have dreams. They had to have hopes. And you would see how large the hopes were by how deep the slavery was. It was like taking a temperature. And slavery didn't have to literalize being slave. It meant that the human feeling was suppressed. Where the humanity was suppressed and done away with in the everyday survival, where everyone took it for normal. So once you took it for normal, you can do atrocious things like making babies the way you want it to be, to sell and this and that and forth. And they would say that was normal. It's just a way of earning a living. Everybody's happy doing it. These guys make love. We get the baby. They would explain it that way to you. And I told you that one time in India when we saw the guy hitting this horse with a bat there. And I was with a woman, Audi, her name was there, and she was excited in seeing it. And I went to the guy, and another guy, Indian, says, "No, sir, you have to hit the horse so that we will obey. You must understand. You Westerners don't." I say, "Okay." And then the same way, when you see that they may, that the beggars, some beggars were kind of breaking their kids' arms or legs and misshaping them so they were good beggars if they were into college.
Yeah.
In fact, if you said, "Let me send your kid to college," or something like this, said, no, he's a good beggar. He's going to be the best beggar in the neighborhood. And so you say, holy shit, man. They've normalized it. But then you guys says, well, this is what they do. They come from this clan and that's the work they do.
Wow.
So I mean, they actually talk to me like that. So I'm imitating the language, the style of language where they use reason. And they made it sound reasonable. And the guy, just like they made it sound reasonable with that poor guy Floyd when their knee on his head or whatever, and they say, "Hey, if you come in this neighborhood, let me tell you, that guy was 6'4" and you can't hold him down." And they make it sound reasonable, but still you say, "Yeah, man," but. And they say, why? It wasn't that you had to hold him down as much as you had to show strength. And you showed strength by making them a piece of shit.
Right.
So then all these organizations organize how to overpower someone. And first they say somehow you had to do something, like the Mossad said, you had to hit them or hurt them or degrade them in a way that they submitted. And there's instructions on how to do that. Where that once the person loses contact with their humanity, they're malleable. You could bend them anyway, because then the humanity gives them a strength. The feeling of being human gives them a strength in the circumstance. But when the feeling of being human is taken away, then they're subject to the circumstance, whether it's cold or beatings or. So it takes the form of survival. From the love affair and the journey perspective, the body is a carrier of an experience. and it is your friend in that. And as you come to perceptions in your life, the body also is no longer a separate body, but a creative act with you. The normalcy of your life becomes, you see it then more from a creative perspective. That it's not controlled by reason in the world or literalness, but you see that much of your life has come about through accidents or circumstance or a momentary love affair that changed the picture. So you see that unplannedness is actually run through the life, and that there was a conversation going on, a creative conversation going on in one's living. And it looks in the form of the inner and the outer. But when the inner and the outer touch each other with a feeling, they become more of an I and thou. When one becomes aware of the creative aspect of their journey, then time and space shift filler. Because an aspect of their being, whatever they're doing, is always having a conversation with the mystery of life. So accidents aren't exactly accidents. They're just as if you made a film or whatever, you would show accidents that it wasn't planned.
Mm.
But it looked like accident. But if you flew overhead, we used to have that, I think, in boot camp, that you had to understand something that happened, that's going to happen. But if you're in flight or above it, you see it before it happened, depending on where you are. So you can, if you're flying over the highway, you can see a car crash about to happen that is still a few blocks apart, but how it's driven towards that situation. So if you can communicate, but basically you saw the whole grid of an accident before it happens and how the complexity of it.
Mm.
And just because it's not in our human logic, you could see that there was a kind of logic that ran through the story, that accidents from another perspective are not accidental, but also remarkably creative expressions. So you also see that when it's up in the air and the love affair breaks over this of attraction and repulsion, there's a moment waiting.
Yeah.
Where you see when it can't be together because of that duality, then it has a conversation in absence that it can't have in presence. In presence, it concentrates it into a fight. In absence, it shows the other dimensions to some degree of the relationship.
Right.
And that means if you dream of it, if you think of it in weird times and situations, there is an itness to it.
Mm.
Because I don't think that you can cry or feel or think in absence about it like that unless there was a genuineness to it.
Yeah.
And so the loss of it, supposedly, to the mind's eye, loss of it, but the loss of it opens up other experiences that were hidden.
Mm.
And you may go from, I should have done this, that happened, that rat, blame them. And but then something in you says, hey, I've done this before. In fact, I've done this 1, 2, 3, 4.
Few times.
I blamed her 7 times in different situations. That little rat and so on. And then I say, holy shit, I'm doing my father.
Huh.
Not exactly your father. That was one, like you'll see your father flash by in the mirror.
Right.
But then you see the whole culture, everything flash by in the mirror. The normalcy of it is how the culture structures itself. And then it needs to psychologically overcome something that made normal. But once the perception of loss is there, you see that a dimension, when you see it's a thou, there's a naturalness in care. That is a naturalness in caring for yourself. The I and thou there is a moment when In fact, it may be even more of a care for the other than yourself.
Yeah.
Hmm? Just as if you were caring for the child or something like that, it may even be more of a care.
Yeah.
So let's say that care that's genuine, that doesn't seem to have a motive, but has a naturalness, supposedly, that's awakened, that's touched. That is part of the creative medium of genuineness. And you see that many of these artists that become obsessed with in their exploration of something have made the expression of what they're doing their journey.
Yeah.
And those who experience it within the art experience the life as art, but not the howdy-do of art, and not but basically the other dimensions of life that is not programmed in the same way, that come about naturally, where the ego is not involved in it. It's a surprise to the ego that something happens. So it's somehow the ego's motive of continuity is not the creative motive. It moves from parallel time. So when you discover that, you see that there's parallel dimensions happening. You can even do
Yeah.
the exercises that I do of the swaying exercises with the clubs where you release the eyes, not to be particularly focused on anything, but just to be able to see the whole picture. And then you may see a specific thing. And I'm kind of also going along with the noise I hear and the plane flying overhead and trying to locate it. And I think I found the whole plot going on up there. And you know those trails that you see up in the sky? At times,
Yeah.
no plane or there's nothing there. It's not clouds, but it's a trail. So then I saw one so tiny, a plane so tiny, and you couldn't hear it. So that meant there was a sound barrier cracking around 600 miles an hour.
Huh.
So they were really, so it had to be some, and then I saw a few others made earlier. So it did seem like they were coordinated.
Huh.
But it did, so you start to see a whole world around you just in doing eye exercises and seeing the trails. And then because I can tell how fast it's going to some degree or where it is, I'm doing my whole senses exercise. And of just releasing them and smelling whatever is smelling, looking at something that you hear or see or feel. But I'm just kind of releasing it for that period of time while I'm doing that club exercise. Yeah. And you do discover hidden worlds in that when the eyes are released, from focus. Then you start to see the peripheral world. And the peripheral world is the inner world that when you view something, you see then the inner world. Or if you were a doctor, you may see the health of the person while you're talking to them.
Right.
So let's say, but our inner world is not only listed for that. And when you do have that, time starts to shift. You can see an event in the moment waiting to happen, but it's in the moment. So you can see that there's a hurt that will happen in time, but just happened in the moment. But that the person exists on a few levels. So there's lag time in experience. Where hidden in the continuity is a shifting conversation, a shifting circumstance. As things you experience in a relationship are breaking up, literalize it. It literalizes over an event. But then you also see through science and creativity, you see breaking up as inherently in a circumstance. It first has to come together before it can break up. It's not breaking up, it's shifting out. And then when it shifts to memory, there's a premise that it reconnects. Then we bring it to, okay, a literal story. So I say, what happens? Well, the person here, they fell in love, this happened, and then they remember each other and this happened in time, but they had to break up to remember each other that way. They couldn't felt that deeply unless they broke up. unless they broke up that deeply. If they broke up that deeply, they may still have a hey baby waiting out there in the moment.
Yeah.
Say, well, holy shit, if I see all this, my notions of a person simply being that person, having a
Yeah.
job and going out and having a life, but then we're presenting a life as primarily a creative work.
Yeah.
And that it's existing on many levels that the person only finds out about later on in time. That they find out by accident what happened to them in that moment. And once they see the larger picture of something, it releases the story from their possession. And they saw that the dream style, the film style, the lifestyle, they were all different dimensions of the same existence. And when you have discipline in any of these expressions, creative expressions, discipline meant love of learning. So anytime that you then consciously were creatively making a life, it was a constant learning process that wouldn't literalize. That much of it had went, in fact, even in the creative relationships, when there was a breakup, they were soul searching immediately. Where in the literal life, they would try to have a corrective so it can continue. In the creative life, the breaking up was as deep as the meeting and had its own body of experiences. So you had to be genuine before you made up again. It couldn't only be therapeutic.
Yeah.
So let's say a feeling in relationship brings you into a whole other subtle dimension alongside you that you've always consciously of, that you've always been searching through, that you've always that you've been trying to make music with, that you've been trying to do this with or whatever, that you're conscious of an absence of something.
Yeah.
And so you could see in the music that you're making is, hey baby, when you're coming, I'm missing you so. So you see even in the shape and how you're holding your head, I'm missing you, baby. Not even having a baby to miss yet. One is taking on the body and the shape and the creative expression.
Yeah.
Where they're trying to have a creative expression in their music, and their creative expression is what's happening to them. And that somehow you miss someone or something, or you miss a presence, or you miss something familiar where you can just hang out or lie down or goof together or lie down where it doesn't have all the pressures of the world around it.
Yeah.
Where sensuality is different than sexuality, where it's kidding around, where it's snuggling, where it's cuddling, where it has a kind of innocence to it, no trip.
Yes. That's it.
Now I'm getting another call. 670.
Well, I'm gonna, excuse me, Danny, for one moment. I'm going to get my tattoo worked on, but I'll listen in just a minute.
Okay, no, take care of yourself. Nice seeing
Thank
you.
you so much. That was so touching. Thank you
do
so much.
call again because there were some things that Terry was just here for a week, so we just had an immersive to some degree. I'll see you later, Carrie. Take care. How are you doing, Will?
Good. Yeah, good.
This stream of consciousness about living and dying. Not so much literally, but you could see it in almost all things. If you buy vegetables that can only last a few days, you can't last too long before they lose their taste and their color and their sense. And okay, so you see the living and dying, and you kind of know that you have to eat it soon, and so on. So it is there in us. And then we were talking about the experiments there with the folks we're talking about here, that they're bringing an experiment with many doses of acid and things like that, and to kind of I say the first time that we introduced those acid and this and that, we were naive and we took it for the experience, not the motive of somehow awakening or being better and more knowledgeable. In fact, being foolish was seemingly necessary for the experiences that we had at the time, that somehow it was foolish to go to India and do this and do that. And that's why I did wake up one day in despair in the mountains, because it was nuts, but it was beautiful. It was deep. It was profound. It was experiential. But to the literal mind, it was absurd. To knowingly put yourself in a mountain and do mantras and have very little clothes on and this and that and have dysentery and bathe in a water that has dead bodies in it and they're pooping it and it's all natural for you. In fact, the water was so bad that I then had to drink Fanta. You know that drink Fanta? It's like orange Pepsi Cola or something like that, which I would have hated to take. But because the water was so bad, I was drinking Fanta, like 5 bottles a day of Fanta. Okay, so it wasn't that you were completely unaware of an American idea of cleanliness that they all laughed at. And if you gave them soap, they just suds themselves all up and played with the suds, and there was no soap used in any. And I think they were right now in retrospect. That the soap may do more damage to the skin than just washing it off or using oils. I think they use clay and scrape themselves with the clay to spread it or whatever. But coming out of there and make it natural, and it just happens to be natural that you're there as a sadhu in India. But then when there is a moment that awakens it, it feels like the cops came to arrest you. Okay. And I say, well, what would that feel like? I say, here we have a situation where people, Janet is free not to get, it's not a not so much, but in her explorations or whatever, it doesn't feel, but everyone else then is free to relate to it. But there's a community. So it's almost as if the body is talking to itself and says, okay, we'll do this or do that, but there's an agreement. And I kind of like the humanity of something that would have been impossible, but now it's shared and everyone kind of looking out for each other in that. But then when Janet looked like she got sick and we called our friend the doctor to examine her, and he also works in emergency rooms and sees people dying and hurt or whatever, he could have easily called the cops and say, are you people crazy? Or she got really sick or hurt or died or something like that. Instead of it being a sweet, humane, shared experience, it would be murder. The same little thing can turn into the creepiest. Okay. And yet I feel, for me, I'm related to a genuineness, which would mean that in our family, you wouldn't want anyone to be a sneak in a circumstance or to have to hide. There may be things that are discreet that you keep to yourself, or it's your movement, but sneakiness, then who needs it? Who needs 4 dogs? If it's sneaky and everyone's angry at each other, who the hell needs dogs? And so then the situation changes from a beautiful experiment. If the feeling isn't there, then you got a clunky house and angry dogs. Okay, the same thing that's goofily beautiful. If the feeling is lost and it literalizes, then the literalness without the experience of depth has a longing inside the body. And that longing has a journey of its own that you find out about. How are you doing, Will?
I'm okay. I'm all right. Figuring it out, going a day at a time, making plans, seeing what actually happens.
Okay, so it's interesting that you can project into a atmosphere a happening, and that you also see that the absence of a partner and the presence of a partner have a similarity thread to them. But the one thing is that you've put in motion is that relationship is no longer having to satisfy poor you and this in your history. that somehow you've put something in motion that may be bugging you, but somehow it has to be genuine. Is that okay, Kai? That somehow you won't get away with, hey, baby, haven't I met you someplace before kind of shtick, or no trip. So somehow we may be flabbergasted when life is demanding no trip from us, when somehow we have taken the trip to be natural. But the trip ain't us. And so when the trip is interrupted, one is not a schemer anymore in the same way of survival, and one is not seeing relationship as survival in the same way that they did just a few moments before, but there's something pure in the attraction. And it's not so much that it's a support system, but it's a shared feeling. And a shared feeling to some extent is like a shared breath, where there's a shared life experience. And it's as simple as the person's life being as important as your life in some way. And in some cases, even more important if it's a crisis going on. So it has the similarity of a child, where you see a child hurt and you forget what you're doing, and the hurt of the child becomes your reality. That somehow a feeling gives you a relationship. But in the world of our own world here, in the literal world, feeling gives you a possessive. And then you have to say, well, the person is angry and fighting. They say, no, the person is resisting being a possessive. It has to be true. So let's say you've now entered into a situation where it's no longer you in the mirror saying, maybe I'll dress up and act like I know what I'm talking about, but actually have to care on that level. And caring on that level for the literal ego is very scary, because the ego can't care on that level. It's a responsibility for it, but the being can. And that means that the so-called other is not an other, but a thou, and their life and your life intermingle. So you are engaged in a remarkable experiment. The cards are stacked against finding another one whose veins and arteries are your veins and arteries, where your perception, your feeling, your breath is one. Not as a law or a rule or a structure, but a shared experience, where you actually experience the other in absence. And it's almost like buying a present for a loved one in their absence. You're imagining them, you're seeing a feeling. So you see those elements are there. But they're kind of, in the genuineness of them is that you understand the absence. There's a difference in aloneness than there is in loneliness. Loneliness captures the story around the psyche. And loneliness isn't a feeling that you would try to evoke if you were writing or you were creating, but not to be damaged. But once you perceive the loneliness, you're no longer defined by it. You see that your relationship creatively is with aloneness. And that loneliness is an indicator of something. It's more like taking a temperature. So the difference between the thermometer and the fever. You see, the loneliness indicates a fever. And it's around something, there's something deep happening in a person's life. At the same time, a superficial continuity is happening. But when you look at it, you start to see dimensions happening in life. The awareness of any of those dimensions gives another dimension to your own life. So we'll say, if you're an educated person, you may look for a lover from that education. You see, and that changes the picture to some degree, because your mind would dismiss those who don't have that. Or if you're creatively involved in something, then your relationship idea may come out of that shared creation. So you see, that dimension is happening independent of the literal person. A creative process is happening in one's life. When one becomes aware of them deeply, it shifts the literalness to the more of a creative expression in life. Then when one is in fact while they're going about their normal life seeking, meaning that there is, in the literal events of the everyday, there's also a hidden magical event of an accidental meeting or shared space that interrupts the space. So as you see that your life, with that awareness to some degree of it being a creative process, while there's a literal you trying to keep it together, there's an evocative you that's sharing life from a different place. And it's coming more from the isness of life, having perceived something. So it's not as time bound. One can have a whole life experience in memory, in the moment, in their dream, in an hour. That would be a life of experience. So as we are in a situation where dying and living is perceptively a creative act, we also understand where the movie is ending. Would you say, Urja?
Yes.
So we're kind of coming to the end of the movie, but then all of a sudden, as we're looking at Netflix, we say, okay, the ending, the next season then comes. So you can see in all the endings of the shows, they're planning a new season. So you can see when your daughter coming that you were planning a new season. Okay. Are you planning, did you share a new season now?
No, she shared one with me that she likes.
Yeah.
It was
No, but then your feelings shared.
Yes.
You know, so then you're experiencing her experience to some degree.
Yes.
And she wants, so then you see what is normal is remarkable. She's sharing her experience deeply in life with you. And
Yes.
you're assuming it. You're assuming the experiences while you're sitting there watching Netflix. You're assuming her hurts and her hopes and her schemes and her dreams and
Yes.
her plans.
Yes. The whole 9 yards. And I don't mean it sarcastically. It's very beautiful.
If she would have just grabbed Will, met Will and grabbed Will in a headlock, he would have had a whole new life waiting.
Yeah, I think they could get it.
If Will did poor guy enough, that would touch her deeply. Will has almost perfected poor me. So let's say if Will did poor me at the right moment, holy shit, this poor guy, you want to try it, Will? You have to refine some elements in it if you want to go out as poor guy as an approach, you don't want to be a poor guy. You could do poor guy. But in order to do poor guy, you can't be poor guy. You have to be pretty cool guy to do poor guy. So what are we talking about? That somehow elements of awareness are very much like elements of awareness that happens in any creative profession or expression that you would be in. That you find out that you have an attraction to something, but then as you go into it, you see dimensions of the attraction. And some of the dimensions of attraction to a creative act require a stillness, require a being with, where you may have to temper the knower before it captures the experience, where it's not around knowing, it's around having the full experience, where you see sometimes a knower tries to stifle the experience. So you see that there is elements of continuity that is afraid of a creative expression. Because the creative expression then questions the literal motive where survival dominates the expression. So the deeper you have the experience yourself, that changes your expression in a way where your creative expression then has another dimension in it. At the same time, we literalize our lives to survival. You see that we live in a creative world which has more dream quality to it than literalness. You see all of these are expressions available to you from the perspective when an incident happens and you re-enter the story from a creative space, meaning that there's a 1/4 of an inch between you and the reality. That 1/4 of an inch allows an experience for you that's not so available if you literalize it. And that means from that 1/4 of an inch, you can have feelings for the story as part of the experience you're in, which you're having anyway when you have a love or feeling or touched by something that allows you to care for something. And if in fact the feeling is lost and it becomes a job, as Carrie said at that time, and then you, as it literalizes, it loses all the elements that attracted to it in the first place. And so when the continuity is based on survival, it suppresses the magic. It suppresses. So then one then has a hidden life that they have to hide in real world. When in fact that life that they're hiding is in fact the depth of them. To some extent that one has to hide their humanity in order to get along with the literalness of a job. What a remarkable thing is happening. And yet people are just people. And yet you see processes happening in people that are remarkable when you come from the journey. You also see the journey in the story. And so when you see the journey in story, you see that time is not stopped. That time itself is in flux. The person's life is moving. The literalness of the everyday. But you also see that even in themselves, if they had photographs of themselves from the beginning to now, they would see the flux that they were in. And someone looking at a person may see the differences in them from when they knew. So you see flux, you see change, you see shift, and then you see the literalness of the everyday. So then you see that you've had a relationship with someone that still goes on in absence and in presence, and is a dialogue still going on, and that even somehow the internet and everything become part of that dialogue, accidental calls. You see that you are in a creative milieu. Who was that now? Is there a noise? No? I just want to know everybody.
I did hear that. I don't know what that was.
Yeah.
That was my fault. Didn't mute
Oh.
myself.
Yeah, that's okay. It was just looked like someone needed help or something. So I did, if we hear from Catherine again, tell her that we have her book. But she has on her back, Catherine Ann Jones is an award-winning author. Heal Yourself with Writing, The Way of Story, playwright, Calamity, Jane, On the Edge, and screenwriter. Touched by an Angel series, Unlikely Angel with Dolly Parton, a professor and Fulbright scholar to India studying shamanism. What do you say? All of that in Catherine Ann Jones. And yet, it looks like regular people when you're visiting. In fact, almost everyone, whatever level they were seemingly on or whatever, when we're meeting them, they're folks, regular folks. And in that, there's a shared experience that couldn't be had when the relationship is to the literalness of them. So when, in fact, you meet someone who's, we'll say like Jai, helping people who are struggling with having to maintain the face of fame and the humanness of being a person, you see that that is happening in many different levels. In the everyday life, that is happening. That one is a persona or a literal persona, and then one is also a creative process that is in flux as a constant. But once there is a focus of care on something, then the creative process that one had that was in flux then is kind of assuring an atmosphere for those it cares for in some way. Now, it's not orders and it's not directions and it's not rules. It's kind of, when the relationship is a creative one with one's children, it's an intuitive one in a large degree. But intuitive is a highly complex process because to the degree that it's intuitive, it's true in a different way. It's true from a different place. When another's life and your life merge, there's an intuition about them in absence and in presence. So care is a norm in a shared life. It's not specified what care means or whatever, but it is a demonstration of feelings. To become aware of the parallel lives being lived means that one is, there's a shift in the perception that humanizes. And when the humanized element wakens, it starts to see the dehumanization of the literal world, that it suppresses the humanization. Because as soon as a human element awakens, you could see it in small doses where people can be in slavery, and then some small incident happens, small to you, but embarrassing to the people who experience it, or denying their humanist elements, where all of a sudden an explosion happens where people were living this way normally. They thought it was normal, but something reveals the normalcy of their situation. And they see that they are being treated inhumanly. But inhuman was normal. But then something is experienced and the person becomes outraged in their being if there is an insult to their humanity on a deep level. It rebels. It doesn't care if you'll hurt it or not. It doesn't care about anything but its humanness. In our experience then, to come back into the life from the human, I kid around and I say, well, the angel enters into your life at a certain point, doesn't have a history. So it's not living in repetition, it's living more in dharmic time, which means that it turns your history more into a mystery. You then you meet your parents in a way that you've never met them before. These are people you've never met before. You're shocked by it, and yet you kind of knew it was in there and avoided. But you meet them as people who happen to be parents or people who happen to be this, but you meet the person. Then you meet the story. But you see the story is not the person. The story is a reflection of something that's happening. As you share a life experience, the shared experience illuminates. When in fact it's illuminated, you see that your life itself is a creative act, and that the history is only an aspect of it, and even that your birth and death is only an aspect of the life that you're in. Just like you have memory of births and deaths of people you actually knew, your life is birth and death, just like the experience that you're having with others. But then you also see your feelings for them, your loss, or a conversation with them in their absence. It has a deeper element than you had when you knew the person. The absence somehow has a conversation that's coming from a different place. And you see then how much of the regular life is hidden in plain sight. And then you also see that hidden to you in plain sight. But that someone who shares with you a feeling reflects your life back to you in a way. That's the possessive. The possessive meaning survival is the main medium. So when you are negotiating a love affair and it's not full and you understand that you're negotiating around a broken heart. But it's not a negotiation. It is, in fact, an experience that's being shared. You'd like it creatively where people are not coming with the norm, where people are coming because they're hurt or this happened to them or that happened, and so that somehow is dominated by the psyche or psychological experience or whatever. But you like the hey baby to be genuinely hey baby, that the situation starts somehow from, that the relationship opens up a doorway that is not bringing the past into it so much, except as a joke or fun or kidding around, but it's not dominated by repetition. So much of the negotiation and much of the fear is that you kind of understand that the past is coming into the present. The relationship that you're having creatively is that the agreement is pure enough or clear enough that it starts with you, that the agreement is really an agreement, that it doesn't have so much of a history brought into the story where you're a poor guy who needs help. That works with some, but when you're a poor guy who needs help from your perspective that way as a move, the move enters into the story. So you see, it's not that it shouldn't or it should or whatever, but you also see when it's being dominated by one's history, by one's psychological state or one's pressure, they then bring that into the relationship. So there's a moment waiting that's around that character in time. So you could see what they meant by, in the Bindu point, the marriage and the divorce waiting, but you add time and space to it. When you bring the history into the story, then as you add time to it, you will run into a repetition or a karmic situation. That's inherently there in the story. When the relationship is coming from a space that is not dominated by the history, but is genuine feeling shared, it's more of a dharmic relationship. It exists on a few levels. It's not based on time or repetition. So I think that you see those in those old paintings, those old Hindu paintings and someone that look like erotic, but they don't look really that erotic. And you see that when you're coming from that creative place, then sexuality is more sensuality, more exploratory, more normalized. It's not to satisfy this or that, or not to satisfy your psyche or make you feel better or whatever. That you've died to that literalness. The relationship of I and thou is a shared experience. You wake up with yourself just as if you were rubbing your body or something like that, and just feeling about your own body and seeing how it is. You feel that's the basis of a kind of sensual relationship where the person somehow is you without being you, but there is a shared feeling that's normalized. The sensuality may express itself sexually. Can the sexuality get to the sensuality? Probably only if it loses it and it starts. When you see that you threw something away, not that someone ditched you or not, but you see that you had a love in your hands for a moment and you threw it away. When you, that is the deeper experience, not to create that artificially, but when you say, hold it, you haven't had the love affair, and you say, no, you've had it, but you threw it away by your move and you realize it. When you say, holy shit, in time, there was a love affair that was happening and I was still in my head about it and should I do this or do that, but it was right there. Okay, so you realize 10 years later or 20 years later on your deathbed, the 100 love affairs that you've had and haven't had. Then you see that the situation you're having about the conversation about the love and not love is normal. It is not something wrong or right. It is normal. It is somehow the people are yearning for a genuine contact and not just a therapeutic one. So when you no longer see your partner as therapeutic, and when you no longer see lovemaking as therapy, or possessive, or feared, or hoped, then you see a genuineness in it, where the waiting, where the normally, where the living, where the awareness of it, where somehow you won't accept the false. that somehow it has to be true in some way, and that's not laid out, but it has to touch you. You can respond. So it's really genuinely a face in the crowd. There's no interest in literally in the crowd in that way. But if there is a look, a face, a wave at you, it humanizes the crowd to an experience. You see that your relationship now is to the human. And so the things that you will do or will not do, whether they're wrong or right, is not as important as they're human in your feeling. When it's coming from the human sentiment, I don't think that it has to join a club or make a stand or anything like that around it. Your life is reflective of a human expression running through the story. So that's what it means in some sense to be in it and not of it. You see the constant stuff that's being created about what's going on. And you do have a relationship to it. But you also understand that creatively you have a journey inside the story, and that friendship is the medium. Okay. Any question there? Anyone else on that we can't see, Kai? Or?
Jimmy Diaz, Sophia, Michael Bravo.
Okay. Are there any questions around there, or we're just kind of we're just almost as if we're conversing, where our lives have been this life in flux, and our life somehow, as we've all shared some spiritual dimensions of it, and so then the conversations that happen are very much the conversations of people who are in a creative field, where the literalness of the world is subject matter for their creative expression. And when you are living in a creative expression as you're alive, then you start to see the other dimensions in the everyday, even though we're still subject. And that's ironic, is to see people who are so supposedly evolved, but then as you meet them, you see that they're still having a fight with their wife or something like that, or the kids won't listen to them, and so they're still weird, and you say, hold on, like Jesus Christ is having a fight with his, okay, because they went out last night and they left the lights on. So then the whole is it, the schmuckiness runs through the story. That still you're just people. But then you also see somehow in moments you see the angel would love to have an everyday person's existence, because they would bring a dimension to that existence. When there is a perception creatively for you, you bring a creative dimension to the everyday existence. And the everyday then becomes filled with accidents or situations about to happen, or because then it is no longer dependent on logic. Logic is one aspect of it. Logic would be, let's go to the supermarket to buy some food for the house. But then the creative dimension will be that somehow you know you're going to bump into someone. And so you see that there's a literal thing in what you're doing in the shopping, but there's also a dynamic in you that knows that somehow you will have a conversation or run into someone, or this will happen or that may happen. So that in the everyday, there's also a doorway perceptively where things may happen. And so when the creative life is second nature to you, this is what we're saying, when it comes from your perception, one re-enters the story. And when they re-enter the story, they come from a different place. Then something is revealed to them. And you see the dynamics. And you see why you would feel so brokenhearted over an everyday affair that any psychologist can explain to you, but yet you see how determined you are to have a broken heart. And you see your own determination. And then you also understand that inherently, you know, a broken heart is waiting, and it's not a flaw in the story. A broken heart is a human experience. And you can see why you can't talk people out of it so easily while they'll sneak out the bathroom window while they do it, because what is illogical in terms of continuity. There is an experience waiting. How the world looks from the other side of the broken heart is a place where the mind can't go, the self can't go. So it fears it like death, like a death experience, and it is. And I say, why? Because from the other side of the experience, the love affair is not an ownership or a possessive. It's a shared life in a deep way. And when it splits up, that shared life, sometimes in memory we'll remember the love of it, the hate of it, the hurt of it, the this or that, but there's no fixed state in it. Once one awakens to the creativity flow of their own life, they see the creativity flow in life around them. So the issues are no longer literally only the issues. The issues also have underpinnings happening where you even see your country in a creative act, you know, being up in the air and this and that. And you see it really is up in the air because it's up in the air. It's demanding. And they're all trying to get it to have no motives, that people have no motives but the purity of something or the feeling of something. And okay. So there is some inclination out there to get everyone on board. So let's liken that to the creative act as if we were making a film together or making a creative act together, or you had a band together. You would understand everyone on board was not making them get on board. It would be a creative act. That everyone enters into the creative act that you're sharing together with a kind of feeling for it is the basis for the creative act. So getting everyone on board is not this forced on board or not police on board. It comes naturally when you share a creative act with someone. And yet, if you figured out how to do it, it would be so impossible, but it comes naturally when there's a true thing, when there's a genuine situation happening. This question of genuine, I'd like to explore, we'll say in the future. I'm glad you guys made it back from California, but now it's even heavier because now you want California completely, right, Kai? Are you feeling that way also?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
Okay, well, you know that anytime you feel strongly and deeply enough, it's the strong and deep enough feelings that will create the possibilities. It's dormantly waiting there. But it's also saying no trip, that there are the people who have a kind of love for you. It's just obviously there, but you move it only when it speaks to you in a true way. So let's say you've almost engaged completely in a creative act where you just had a rehearsal. And so then you kind of are measuring whether in fact the kids are genuine in their feelings or it's all fantasy or whatever. But you also see your boy is not a slouch. He's putting something together without fully knowing it, but he is putting, they're seeing that they can have a life that they would love to have, but that somehow it comes from a place in you. Now, others would think that's crazy where you're literally training to get a job and a career move and this and that. But at the same time, you're introducing them to a world where a creative expression is not so crazy because you'll see that once you see it, then you see that he's putting stuff together.
Yeah.
Okay, and that you're lending yourself to it. So to me, it is like a rehearsal that you've shared, that you're not confined to where you are. You are where you are because you're kind of choosing to be there around the situation. Is it okay?
Mm-hmm.
So you're no slouch. You're kind of slipping in a moment here and there. And so even though you're literally in Pennsylvania and that's a place and it's a real place and a real situation, you also see how much of life is also this larger picture. I think that's happening for all of us. There's a larger picture while we have a regular life going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that that some of the questions that are happening, without exaggerating, are part of a larger picture. That somehow you've entered a phase of your life where it has to be somehow true. And true is not this fixed, tough thing, but that it's simple as looking out for each other and a feeling, as one is looking out for themselves in a way. So I feel that as you experience the life through the feelings as a creative act, and even the reaction to feelings that have a break for 20 years or something like that, still have an undergoing where there's maybe a moment. I told you, my daughter passing away brought then relationships from 30 and 40 years ago that were impossible to ever even say, hey, baby, how you doing? That in an instant, the story fell away and the feeling connected. And yet, why did we ever have such a weird scene? And what the hell was going on? It was so, and just fell away in a feeling.
Mhm.
And it didn't fall away because it was a bad thing or nothing. You see that, in fact, the mechanics of bad feelings and hurts and separation is not something to get rid of. They, in fact, create a dynamic. Someone from 30 years ago is still existing in your brain, in your mind. And then you have an experience with them, or a letter, or you hear something, or you read something, and all of a sudden it opens up a whole other parallel dimension that's been with you all along, but you thought was in the past. So an event then reflects on that, or an event then frees the story from its possessive. You see that the one is possessing that part of the story. What would have been impossible from the ego, because the person would have picked up on you that you were lying. It had to come from a true place, didn't it?
Mhm.
And so it had to be a major loss where there would be no bullshit in the story. Where it was purely, hey, baby, are you okay? How you doing with it? And somehow it needed a genuine event, not a therapeutic event, not a psychological event, not any of that. It would checkmate all your psychological approaches and all your therapeutic approaches. Somehow it had to be true, and true somehow you can't rehearse. Somehow you have to locate it. It has to come from a space. So as you then start to explore, as I do, as now I'm looking more into, when I'm doing the exercise out there, I tell you I'm looking around, I let my eyes roam and my smell roam and hearing roam, and then sometimes I coordinate them naturally, but it's not so focused on anything. You start then to see parts of the expression reveal. And you see the flow of it. And most of us have created a life expression that is our own expression creatively. You're still into it, Urja? Now, what I'm finding is as I open up these, re-examine the senses, where they're not around survival, but in the exercises, they're more around creativity, where they're released. Then I'm finding another dimension in the released eye that's free to focus on anything that calls it, but also is, so a lot of what is happening anyway is just kind of revealed. But once it's revealed, it becomes part of an expression for you. It's as if you're creating something, and then something away where you're stuck in the thing, where you're making a mistake. In fact, oftentimes in a creative project, you have to make mistakes so deeply before something can open up. So mistakes in the creative world are not seen as mistakes, but seen as part of a creative process. The frustrations, the dynamics, all that happens in the creative process opens up possibilities. And the possibilities is that you're coming from a true place in yourself. And you see that the challenge in this situation is forcing you to go through your whole existence in some way and see your makeup. It's forcing you to come from a true place. And true place is not spelled out. It's not laid out this way or that way. In fact, it comes out of in some places for me, it came out of that despair. That when the spiritual collapse in the Himalaya for me as being weird, then a conversation with someone wholeheartedly revealed another dimension of the story. But it was the despair that created a wholeheartedness. Because then when despair enters into the journey of life, it's not despair. It is creatively a happening that sets the stage for a creative possibility. But what happens in the despair is that you've lost your relationship to the false. It would be as if I was fighting for the country or something like that, and then I see they were full of shit, how disgusting it was. And then I see I'm in a situation that has despair in it because they have songs and marching orders, and doesn't make you get into it. But then you see something, and you see the inhumanity of it, and that however many songs you're singing about it, it's absolutely deeply bullshit. It's forcing you to violate your humanity in some way that echoes through your life. And as it echoes through your life, you see the delusion. You go from illusion to delusion. I joined the Navy as a kid because of the movies I've seen and when kidding around. But then you go as you become delusioned by seeing that you go from a fantasy of yourself, what they call a fantasy, but which is your life. That it was a movie in my mind's eye allowed me to be in a movie, you know. Okay. But then as it literalized, and you saw that the purpose was hidden from you while you were to act it out, while you were part of a process that you were giving you songs about and marching orders about, but you were not there in the room when they made it, when they made the thing. You see yourself then in a world of conspiracies. And even though they're only schmoes in a room together in the conspiracy, you see the trickle-down effect of being a stranger in a strange land. Whenever you discover the inner workings of anything, you find out that you're a stranger in a strange land in something. You were coming from a different place. You see the move. I was just looking at something about the companies that produced the opiates and how they made a fortune or something like that, and how they were planning to make it and so on. We were looking at it together and how remarkably planned it is. And then I remember that world where addiction was pre-planned in the circumstance. But they were just taking, it's nice for your headache and it's nice for this or that. But they were planning in the board of how to create a constant purchase of their product through addiction. And then you also saw the medical world was becoming that again and again. The treatment was becoming the norm. So, and the presuming was that the treatment was a way of finding you out, but then you started to find out that you were getting sick from the treatment. And that the treatment itself was creating. So when in fact you see it shifted from a medical perspective to a business, then you see it wasn't doctors and nurses any longer. It was insurance companies that employed doctors and nurses that told them what to do and what to. So of course, our tentativeness with the medical world, just in having the experience when you understand at times people are in the doctor's office, they say most people conceal what's happening to them. They say, are you sleeping okay? And even if they don't sleep at all for a week or something, they say, oh, sure, it's okay. This is okay. So somehow one is protective, not only the psychological stuff, but most of the doctors tell me how difficult it is to, because no one will cop to what's happening to them in a way, unless it becomes critical mass. They just say, it's okay, I'll manage it, you know what I mean? So, but then you say, well, what is happening on level? And you see that somehow the process of living and dying is holy in a way. One cares for it. One is protecting it. Almost as if they're saying, your child this and that. And they say, oh, he was okay. He must have been sick yesterday. And we make up an excuse for the story, their view of your child. You also make up something like that for your body. Well, it's okay. Tomorrow I'll feel better. It was only... But somehow there is a dialogue, but it is also indicative, not only craziness in the literal world, but it is indicative of caring for something that has a intimacy to it. And you see that there are times in your life that even in the dumbest time, even going to pee has an intimacy to it, or an aloneness to it, or an interruption of the literal world where you're alone with a moment. Now, I've read years ago that that was a source of strikes with slaves and so on like that, where they couldn't take a break to pee or something like that, or they had to eat while they were working, or they had to pee on their pants, or they, until there was a strike, that it was inhuman, that certain elements, the person should be free to have that time alone. They say because it wasn't just poop time, it was alone time, alone with yourself. So I read where there were real strikes and fights over it, not being allowed to do that, where that was the humanization of the population. There would be a moment when they would see that they had become dehumanized, or not respected, or non-existent, that there would then be a kind of collective explosion, even though they may have been going through that for 50 years or so. Something happens where it looks like rights on the outer world, but there is a demand to be perceived humanly. And when it's perceived humanly, the idea that you own something is absurd. You see then when you perceive the human in the other, you're caring for something, you're not owning it. And so then you see that in the love relationship, what is going on is not an argument, but it's not fully there. It's not in a full invitation. And it's usually accurate. It doesn't have to be accurate in the subject matter, but it's not, the energies are not fully there to make a life together, or a shared life together. So something happens. There's most of our world is hidden from us. One meeting another about relationship, when they may in fact be genetically seeing if a baby is possible in some nuanced way. So there is a remarkable experiment going on in human life. And in what we call relationship, there's a remarkable experiment going on many levels that you have access only in time. The idea of making it happen or not making it happen, that is the literal you in the story. But there is also moments in memory and dreams where you'll see that it was almost completely a creative act. And that you had to lose it to find it. Not as a possessive, but to discover in its absence what it was, what the experience was. So we've created a milieu that is very much resembling a creative milieu, where it's natural to explore these dimensions, just as if we made movies together, or we write, or we share a creative space, where you, to the painter, you would understand how many colors are hidden in a color. And that if you're going to explore how many colors are hidden in a color, it's almost metaphysical, this idea that there are colors hidden in the color, when most of us just walk past the color as being that. But then as you experiment with color, it releases other colors to the extent that you can see. Now, some of the color field painters became so obsessed that there was no peripheral life left for them, but color. That's why I'm saying the elements of exploration, and then there's a trap of addiction in all things. And when you see addiction, then you, like we see in that film, you see that the addiction was calculated, except it kept you in the dark. It just encouraged you to use it and be happier, to help you with sleep and this and that. But then you also see that you are then organized into a system that you need. So the difference between caring for something and then literalizing it into a system where neediness is the measure. Anytime neediness starts to dominate. So there's a difference between the use of these things experimentally And I say, what would that be? And I say, let's use coffee because coffee is generally used and it's natural. So if I was going to go downtown, I may have a cup of coffee on my way out or something like that. There's actually a chemical process going down in that. And then those people who experiment with different, the drugs, the exploratory drugs, they kind of understand intuitively what they are. You see, and so where you're coming from then becomes important. Just as I say, as dumbly as that, if you have an appointment downtown and I have to rush there, I may finish a cup of coffee to accelerate my processes. It's natural. And you're doing it anyway. You're just illuminating it now. If you want to energize the body towards a project, then coffee is the vehicle for you. Then you see that the other experiments with these psychedelics or what they're now toning them down with, they're now experiments psychologically. Before, when we took them, we went on a trip. We took a trip. We didn't lay out on a trip a psychological state or betterment or anything like that. It opened up a world. And so then you knew of each thing, what effect it would be to some degree. You managed it so it wouldn't be poison. Okay. And so it's amazing. It became almost like spices or whatever. You know how salt tastes, how pepper tastes, how turmeric tastes, all these things. So basically, if you're a cook, you know all these flavors. If you're utilizing these things on your journey, then you start to understand. But where they dominate, where the thing itself, then it becomes an addiction. In the addiction of need, you're captured then in the literal world again. So somehow one is measuring their journey. And as you are aware of the journey in your life, you see that there's a genuineness that you're caring for, or an integrity that you're caring for. So then you also see in the relationship challenges, there's a truth happening. And that it comes together when it actually comes together. It doesn't come together because you own it or pressing it or your fear or your hurt or that somehow it's a creative act that requires a truth between the people, that they're into it. And it's as dumb as, hey, baby, do you want to try this thing? But there's something genuine in that expression. Where you understand that in that hey, baby invitation, there is a shared experience. And it's the shared experience that you're talking about, but it's somehow you've entered into a place where it has to be true. And truth is not, again, this rah-rah thing of costume drama, but truth, I'm getting another thing, it's saying, remind me later. Okay, now, have I lost you? I lost you for a moment, yeah. Maybe it interrupted me at that moment. Did the energy send that interruption? Or around too long?
It looked fine.
Yeah, well, no, from my side, it says remind me later. There's some information there and it says remind me later or something like that. Oh, who is this down here? Is that, that's Derek, huh?
Derek has a picture of
Yeah.
Wheel
Okay.
there.
Okay, any questions at all? Everything okay? Ursula, has your daughter gone back or is she still,
He's
Yeah.
leaving Saturday morning.
okay, tell her bon voyage, Godspeed.
Yes, I
Take care of
will.
herself. But let her know she's always welcome too, just to jump in or kid around or whatever, you know, there's a
Okay.
few,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
I think that Brenda would like her to come one day.
Oh,
to show
yes.
her.
He gave me a wonderful
Maybe
massage.
some shoulder knee questions, you know, okay. Okay, everyone okay? Will, are you okay?
I'm okay. I'm working on productivity this week. And it's always a creative expression, but there are always things that I want to sit with, but I'm I have a bunch of things I want to accomplish, to get done, or things that, realities that I wish to create, or things I wish to move towards. And
You know, that's funny. Let me say Segway said the same thing. Segway has been working on Mary's uh, process that she has out there. She's growing all those plants. So they've been working and everyone's been cutting and chipping and shipping away. I'll show you. But you say don't show it because well, Segway says don't show it on YouTube. He says YouTube is not Skype and the other things that you should comb your hair and go on YouTube because there are characters. Okay.
as soon as you've got pants, that's probably the main thing.
So is that correct, Segway? He's telling me YouTube is different. Is that correct, Kai?
Well, it's accessible by anyone who wants to watch it,
Okay.
if people were to find it, but it seems, I found that I think the energy kind of keeps a nice, safe space for what we do.
Yeah. Well, it's out there and it's, we've all had a shared experience. And then there's a literal experience that we've shared, but then in reflection, you see our relationship was really evocative. And so therefore memory can locate things in it that thought can't. Because then memory starts to see other dimensions in the story that were hidden in plain sight. Now, that's happening in the world there, where people are being discovered that this happened to them, or that happened to them, or this happened to them. But from the perspective of the creative perspective, it didn't happen to them. There was a process. They're aware of their creative process. So when you locate experiences through having an experience now that familiarizes with an experience that was hidden from you that you had then, you see dimensions in the story that are hidden in plain sight. As you go deeper into the experience, it doesn't belong to you, the life. It starts to see that there's something pure in the life that's a creative process. So then memory then is part of that creative process, but it no longer belongs to you in the same way. It's as if you were a writer or a screenwriter or a movie maker or a painter or whatever. That memory then is not a possessive. It allows you an insight into something. And so it frees the story from a history to mystery. You see, your life has been a mystery. While it has been a history of you, the you is a carrier of a mystery. And you see a journey in your life. There's a quest for something hidden in the story. And that relationship to this so-called thing hidden in the story kind of has to call it, where its own being is sending out a message. And that's what happens with singing and stuff like that, where a person is sending out a deeper message that may be even more capable in their song than they can in their life. But there's a communication to the mystery in a person, but it's a mystery in the person. And that one person may be touched by something that others would just walk past. So you see then when you become aware of a parallel life being lived that is creative, there's a purity to it, which is not what they've captured as their idea of purity and making it into show business, but an intuitive sense that the life is precious, that an intuitive sense that there is in fact dimensions of existence, that for you to visit them requires a depth in yourself. And I feel that is what is happening. So when in fact the dialogue is in relationship, it is not an argument to convince someone to be this or do that. It is based on a mutual perception of seeing. When there is a mutual perception, then the acts that we do together is a perceptive one shared. Just as if how weird it would be, as if we made that movie together, everyone knows their roles so succinctly and how they interact and the creative effects it has. Somehow you visit a creative existence as your true existence. And then the experience in it are creative ones. They create expressions or realities or hurts. When the feeling is there, one has a flow. When the feeling is lost and the situation literalizes, then you go from aloneness to loneliness. You understand, as it literalizes, it hunkers down into a literal experience. But when you have the experience deeply, there is, let's say if you've experienced really deep hunger, and then you walk through a neighborhood that's hungry, or alone, or strung out, or hurt, you experience that, even though you're not having it at the moment. The experience is not literal. There's an evocative experience that connects you. And somehow when that evocative experience connects you, it's instant. It's as if you've known the person all along, or you may have just met them, but somehow something is touched. And when it's touched, lives are shared. And you get a minute experience of the I and thou experience as a fact of your life. So for me, more and more, I'm seeing it somewhat from the other side of the mirror, as I described before, where the dying process and the living process are inherent. Does it have a horror movie aspect of it times? Yes, but basically, the dying process now is pretty natural to me as the living process. And perceiving that process, it does give you a kind of insight into a hidden aspect of living. That while you're living, dying is also happening. And that many of the attitudes that are coming psychologically may be intuitive about a process that you're in. We experience a multidimensional existence. The literal one of survival attempts to dominate it, but then in reflection, you start to see parallel lives being lived within one life. And when there is a love connection, there's a shared experience of those parallel lives as being normal. So it becomes normal to have that feeling if you're eating and sharing a meal. It becomes normal to watch a show together. It becomes normal, but it's the kind of together feeling that's not literalized as together, but a shared experience turns the normal every day into a creative act. And when you see the life as a creative act, or that aspect of life, you see that there are many dimensions of life. There's the literal you, there's the evocative you, all of these coexisting. When I mentioned that I was born with my father's cancer, that I find out 60 years later that I caught, that he caught something that he had, it was there in my life all along. And if it was there in my life all along, it was doing it, you see how many life forms are existing within you, and that somehow the system is balancing it into a cooperative. And then as it starts to shift to a dying process, you see the cooperative starts to shift. But that life you see then as a creative process, it's not a possessive. It shifts the plane. Because then you see, just as in the film, the audience can tell if something was genuine or not. They can boo it or they can applaud it. And if you were the actor in it, you would be able to get the nuances of applause or booing to govern your work. Even though it may be in the dark or hidden from you, you understand that your work is a conversation with the mystery. And that conversation with others is revelatory. When the conversation is around the mystery, the friendship opens up possibilities of seeing. Because the friendship doesn't have the motive of continuity or possessiveness at that point, there's a shared experience. The shared experience allows you to experience, we'll call a spiritual experience that's coexisting with you. When one is aware of a spiritual experience moving in their life, they don't join clubs so much, their life then has that as a normal expression in it. So they experience what it means to be religious, but not being dominated by religion with rules. They understand it's not rules. When you have the religious feeling, then you understand it's creations. When you have the creative feeling, you're no longer living in the rule-dominated world. You are human by nature. You don't need that many rules to be a human being. But you don't accept the rules that make you a prisoner of the story. So somehow the perception frees the story to your creative expression. See, the frustrations were more that it wasn't so. It's there, but not there. And it's not based on persuasion. It's based on somehow the person is free. Relationship then between people is that they're free to, but if in fact you do merge, it is person on board, no motive, no trip beforehand. That sounds impossible.
Well, we're talking about, our orientation seems to be about navigating via a kind of genuineness and about our personal expression and then also the coming together, collaboration with others, things like that. But I wonder about your, I wonder how this world looks to you. What about the sum of all these individual expressions as they look in culture right now? And what about wishing to change big things in this world and all sorts of stuff like that?
I feel that basically what I'm sharing with you and what I've shared with others, there is something inherently now in each person. While they're in themselves doing their thing, I think that there's also a piece of what we've shared in each person. So I feel that you will express it now in your love affair and your situation to some degree. So our medium is an immersive, where everyone shares a moment, and they've taken out inherently creatively a piece of the moment, an experience of the moment. So I feel that that's what we've shared, that basically, as you've experienced deeply something, you re-enter the story from a different place a little bit, subtly. Where before, it releases the story from the literalness of description. Will say that your description of you is this or that, this is what's happening for you mentally or structurally. But then when you see creatively, the very things that were problematic in the literal world, meaning that you have a prior condition of reasoning that would interfere with your normalization of getting a job or having a relationship and just getting on with it, but that somehow you would have to say, I don't know if I like this job, should I do this? That is seen as a fault, and it is a fault, but it's not a fault in the creative life. If you're having that question because that question exists in the thing, you're not 100% into it, or you're not thoroughly into it. So you are taking a measure, a temperature of your body, and it says, I don't know, should I do this? But I don't know, should I do this is in fact pretty accurate as to what the situation is for you. It's half this and it's half that. So I don't know that you can suppress your creative sense. Your creative sense is seeing what's happening. It is this and that simultaneously, and it's not letting you act on it. And anytime you try to act on it or act as if the person is having a problem, I say it may look like they're having a problem socially, but their problem is brilliant. It's stopping you from making a move. So I have a problem. I don't know. My mother did this to me. And I say, but what is he really doing? He said, he's trying to stop Segway from asking for $20. So he's talking about it. So I say, can you use your hang up as a tool? Can you take my hang ups and make them into a tool to use? I say you're doing it anyway. You are taking your hang-ups and using them as a tool. But now you're enlightening it. And so then when you're enlightening it, the hang-up is no longer a hang-up. It's reflective of something that's happening. And the person, when you see it, the person there may be a touch, being touched by what you're going through. But when you're touched by what the person is going through, what they're going through changes. When someone cares enough about them to look into it, then it's not, when someone feels for it or shares it with you, it starts to force a genuineness in the experience. No trip. So then you start to see the trip of survival of the self and the genuineness of the being running through the story, and how the trip of the self has been a protective, almost as if it was carrying a child. But then there are moments where you experience that the self is not fulfilling. And there is something that opens up then, where you then start to research yoga or this or that. But that is an indication that something is starting to awaken in the person, and they're looking around that something is missing in their life. Now, they may literalize it as something missing. Some of the religious people will say God is missing, not the person is missing, or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, but God is missing in life. And it's relatively so, but they literalize the God. But we'll say a kind of true feeling is the God you're talking about, that somehow for the spiritual aspect of it, it has to have no motive. Meaning motive, the primary motive is survival. But the primary motive in a love affair is not survival, but genuineness. So the challenge that is happening for us is a pressure towards a genuine state. So I feel that all of us in the love affairs will be in the friendship, then the love affair kind of has to be genuine. Now, there have been many love affairs that have come out of our situation, of people who have met each other, have known each other over time, shared, and then say, where the hey baby state is not that difficult, that you want to try this, or where you're kind of living in that feeling anyway, and that's the basis of it. So there is a trust that happens, which is not literal trust, but it is kind of creative trust of friendship. So when you lose that, or a move is made, it breaks your heart. But it's designed to break your heart. When the relationship has a true feeling to it, in the loss, the broken heart is intelligent, it is not stupid. It is that deep, the relationship. There is something seen in the broken heart, which is actually to be able to see the mystery in the life. And that's why you use broken mirror, or you're looking through the mirror into the real world, and you see the history is not there, just a mystery in front of you. So there's an aha moment waiting. When you say, of course, this was happening all along, you perceive it. And it's not going to let you get away with any moves now. Life is not going to let you get away with any trip now. It's kind of demanding a kind of honesty, again, that is not literally, but is creative. Is that okay, Will? Or you want to do Will?
Yeah, apparently.
Practice Will for a moment on Kai. See if he's convincing. Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. What angle? Do you have any requests?
No. I'm just saying we'll see for Kai now as a pure person. So you say, hey, you want to go out tomorrow night and go see a movie or something like that? And she says, I'm taking care of the kids. What the hell are you talking about? So then she would demand something deeper from you than saying, hey, let's go see a movie or anything. Okay. Because she's in it. So let's say that it kind of has to be true because the person that you're yearning for in some way picks up on where you're coming from. And for them, somehow it has to be true in some way that's not spelled out, but no truth. So let's say a situation is forcing no poor guy will. If you want a lonely poor guy will, then there's people down there in the neighborhood. But this lady says, you want this sweet thing and hang out with this sweet thing, brother? Don't give me this poor guy crap. I want a lover, not a schmaltzer. Is that possible? And Will says, I'm your lover, man. Have you gotten to that yet? Hey, baby. So I'm saying, be aware at the same time that you're going through a normal situation in life, you're going through a deeply creative situation. And then since you've tried to explore creativity and spirituality or whatever, you've added another dimension creatively to what is happening. And that means that when you've added spirituality to it or creativity to it, you can't lie. And lying is normal between people. But when there is a true love between them, even if there's a lie, it's a goofiness that they laugh about. It's not, when the I and thou feeling is happening, then everything is a shared experience. When there is a survival of a form that doesn't have the feeling in it longer, then people have to hide themselves in order to maintain a continuity. So there's a moment waiting that will find out that the person's feelings aren't into it. And that collapses the story usually. So generally, there is a genuineness that runs through a relationship because there's a remarkable creative exchange that happens in the simplicity where people melt into each other. The I and thou is a kind of melting. And in the melting, there is dimensions that open up that require that feeling to be seen. And so then if you look at what you call God or the energy or the spirit from that feeling, it's a genuine conversation that you're having with it. So it may throw you back to being a child and being scared and crossing your fingers and talking to God or talking to Jesus or talking to Mary. And you see there was a genuineness in it. And there was enough of an innocence in the story to detect a parallel state that the adults couldn't see any longer. The naive relationship to it was the true relationship. The literal one lost it. Because the literal relationship to a God figure becomes a possessive. The mistakes, the accidents, the trials, the experiences are the God experience. It would be as if God came into your body to have the human experience. Not telling you what to do, but all the schmuckiness, all the hurt of it, all the beauty of it is part of the living experience. If an energy comes into your body, it would want the whole experience of what it means to be. I feel that in our everydayness now, we are experiencing what it means to be. And then there's not a lie that it has to be a feel-good proposition or happy-go-lucky or happy face life. But you see creatively, you would like to be able to, you'd love to have a role that challenges you deeply in every level. And you see in your life that you have a role that challenges you deeply, that opens up every dimension of your life in some way. Yeah. And the dopey love affair has all those elements in it, in memory and reflection and loss and finding and all. It has that whole, so in retrospect, one discovers this whole parallel existence that they've been living while they've been a normal citizen. They find in retrospect that the normalcy is also an illusion, that there is a creative act entirely. and that somehow the relationships and the absence of relationships was the medium. Okay, everyone, shall we say namaste or good day for the day?
Yes.
I seem to say, Kai, I'm going then. I must be going. Are you okay? Was there anything else that came up, or was this okay? Just shared.
Beautiful.
Is it okay, Will?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, it seems okay. I'll have to reflect on some things myself. Maybe Buddha and the Dancing Girl. I'll look through it a bit further. Remember, she asked me the other day, did I read it?
Several times.
And I have looked into it. Huh?
Yeah, I
Well,
remember her. She
I
asked me.
haven't read something fully. Even a newspaper may take me a day and a half or something to read because I'm not. I'll go somewhere. I'll come back to it or whatever, and and then I'm keeping a lot because I only read part of it or something like that. But I keep something that's pertinent to the journey in some way. I am meeting. Like we said in the breath book or whatever, I have been breathing that way for 30 years or more, whatever. But then you discover someone who's focused on it so much that there's little elements that you see. So when you start to see people who are doing what you've been doing all along and devoted themselves to it, then there's an aha moment waiting, and that reflects on something. So in some of these books, in some of these circumstances, you accidentally discover something. Now they're all talking about Bitcoin here. It turns out that Joan is pretty good, and then it turns out that Hillary, they're all pretty hip around it, and Joan knows this and that, and who did what, and what and yet, so from my perspective, I'm getting a kind of our friendship insight into the Bitcoin thing. Not so much that I'm doing, but that Mary they may try some experiment together and try something. I think tomorrow. But again, I still am not allowing myself to get it where I'm involved in it, where I'm of it, but I'm trying to awaken others that are friends to see where it's at and where it is spiritually for me. And that would be, just as I said here, the paintings and the things that I've collected over the years have a value that if I pass away, they'll look at it and it will pay off the house. And so that's my dopiness of I created my own Bitcoin or something like that, but it had to come about through trading and friendship and the dopey arguments and all, but it had to come about through our theater, where I'm not in that literal market world or the business world aspect of it, but the friendliness that allowed exchanges of things, and some of them may be masterpieces, but they were just exchanges between friends. And so I felt that I'm Bitcoined already. And just taking it natural that I would trade a painting for a car or something like that. I like that idea. And if the person knows what it is and they can make them more profit if they wish, but if we need the car. So I kind of like our own idea of business that is not business, but is a kind of exchange between friends. And what does that mean? Is usually business usually has a lot of sneaky shit going on all the time in it. That they know something you don't know and you're buying it and this and that. But in the friendship, there's less of a sneakiness in it, and it's more of a kidding around, shared space. When you do discover sneakiness, which is normal out there in the market world, it kind of interrupts the friendship. When the profit margin took place over the friendship feels it. The profit margin is normal, but then you see it's not normal. The profit margin dehumanizes us in the pursuit of it. It makes logical something that's really cheesy. And yet you would never do that with your own kids or something like that. There would be a feeling. So you see that somehow with your own kids or someone you love, you wouldn't have to be bothered about the profit or the scheme or the manipulation. They're just a shared experience. When you don't have that feeling for a larger population, then they become a thing that you can manipulate or get off or join off of. That is supposedly what the 1% supposedly realizes, or that they don't have the feelings of what it means to be a person in the story. They just pictures or numbers or whatever to manipulate. So that is always the fear, that there's a dehumanization in the process. Because there is a dehumanization in the process, not that there's a fear of a nothing. The fear is that incredibly that the human being becomes a number. And as they become a number, their life is owned by something. Okay, we're okay. I hope to see you. I'll see you tomorrow night, Derek. Are we on tomorrow night then? For some who were able to jump in. Okay, if not, I'll see you Sunday. I'm glad you got back okay, and the kids are cool. Everybody's okay with it, with the trip? Did you see Dr. Joe?
No, that's next week.
Oh, next week. You're going to see it literally?
Yes, I'm going to Denver in like a week and 3 days or something. Week and 2 days.
Denver,
Yes.
you're welcome. Anytime. Tell me if you have it's an hour bus ride. I'll pick you up.
Well, if I had made I didn't make an extra day. I'm literally going for a retreat. I get there about 2 hours before it starts, and then I leave this morning, but I hadn't thought about that.
It's just I wanted to know.
Yeah, okay, it's just there.
Yeah.
And Rafi's also in Denver, and he just saw Derek and Joan. They drove through Denver, So basically, always saying, look, in your journey, our friendship is there for you if you need it. But do your thing, do what you're doing creatively, you know what I mean? But if in fact you get in a sense creatively or over your head or whatever, then give Urja a buzz. She'll probably save your life if something's happening,
I would
or she
love
probably would be interested. So what I'm saying is it's there for you. Okay. But in your plans, let's see if it's creative for you, then make that contact. It's your call. Because you are doing something already there. Is he having a retreat there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be okay. Although some of these guys are under fire again out there around the vaccination story. But that's very explosive.
Yeah, I haven't heard that he is, but
So
I
just
don't
in
know.
the same as in California or here or in Denver or whatever, we're here. Just creatively you connect, but also do your thing. I see that there's an experience that you're having, that you're sharing, and that you provided somewhat with the children, an experience that you're sharing. And there is a pureness to it at the same time. It's become normal for you. Your life has become spiritual and a normal one simultaneously. But again, spiritual as just a regular person somehow has changed. And so somehow they see a true calling in their life. So although they're regular people in the world, they also have a relationship to something that's happening for them. That's usually what a creative process is. And that's why it's become specialized. If you are something that allows you insight, then there's something there's an integrity that awakens with the happening. That as you have the insight to something, there is a specialness in it, a feeling for it that has a purity to it. As you see it, it integrates itself into your life. So then we see, okay, the medium of relationship, we're coming, we desire, and we have to bring no trip, no historical trip to it. You understand that somehow relationship is now a creative affair. And it's requiring no trip, no poor me, no psychological me, no historical me, that somehow it's a healthy thing.
Yeah.
It's not a means towards the health. It is, in fact, healthy people saying, hey, baby. And I don't need to literalize that they're athletic people saying, hey, baby, but that somehow it's not coming so much from the history. But it's coming, it's almost as if you're being offered, you want to make this movie together? And then you see exactly what kind of training you have to do, what kind of push-ups you have to do to be in that state creatively. And then that it's a shared experience with another where they, okay. So I say once these kind of conversations happen between us, it becomes a creative experience almost entirely. And there's an integrity to the creative experience because the audience is watching. I don't know if the audience is judging, but the audience is watching. And so you can gauge to the audience the truth of your expression. Somehow it can see when you're bullshitting. And so once you kind of have a second nature to you now conversation, it's almost that the energy is the audience of something. Or that there's a creative dynamic happening for you, and that audience is your memory will see something that can't be seen in the presence by you easily. So you then have a relationship with the hidden dimensions of your life. And that can be accessed only from a kind of true state in yourself. And the true state, again, can be as dopey as a kid crossing fingers honest in a prayer. Where you have a response, but the response is to that honesty in you. The creative honesty in you. Okay. Namaste. I'll see you
Thanks,
in a few
Danny.
days. I'm glad you got back okay. And Urge, you're good. Everyone, Will, you okay? And everyone I can't see, take care of yourself. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you, Danny.
Okay, thank you.